Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast with me, Johnny Pardo. Today, I welcome Richelle to the show, where we're going to be talking about creating your dream life abroad, self-confidence, and many more things linked to that. So just a quick introduction to Richelle, and then we'll dive into the conversation today. So Richelle is otherwise known as the Move Aboard Coach. She left her life in the US and has been living abroad for over a decade. Now she works helping other people overcome fear and self-doubt so they can create their own dream life abroad. So, Richelle, welcome onto the podcast today. I'm glad to have you here. So, obviously, you've done this for yourself. You've moved abroad over a decade. A lot of admiration. That must have taken a lot of courage, going through all of that. So now you're obviously helping other people, and we met in a business setting, and I kind of know you've been doing this and always loved the niche, like I was saying before. So you've obviously done it yourself, but what is it that really wants you, what part of you wants to help other people move abroad?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thanks so much for having me, by the way. I would say the way I got started doing this was actually way back when I first moved abroad, I was living in China. And I had what started as like a really crappy like teach abroad blog that eventually became a travel blog. And I was talking a lot about my experience, and I kept having people reach out to me saying, I want to do what you're doing. How do you do that? I'm worried about getting scammed. Like, people hear all these horror stories about teaching in China and these sketchy schools. And then people were worried because obviously US or UK to China is a huge leap. And then I was seeing firsthand what was happening to a lot of first year teachers as well, like in the education industry. I myself had not a great first year experience. We can talk about that later if you want. But I ended up like alone on a factory lined highway in the middle of nowhere, where I was the only non-Chinese person for miles. So that was a little bit rough. And so a lot of people were reading my story and they were saying, I want to do what you're doing now, but you've made it work. And I was paid really well as, a college admissions consultant in China a couple years later. But there was this fear of like, how do I do that? How do I make it happen without getting scammed? And I was seeing people, fall for these programs that would promise the world and undeliver, like what happened to me. And I would see people that really wanted to go, but would never make this dream happen because they were worried about what happened to me or worse happening to them. And it just sort of made me angry. And I was like, there has to be a better way, because I knew there were really good opportunities. I knew that these people could do this and that there were good jobs. It was just hard for people to find them if you didn't live in China. And so I actually kind of started coaching just out of, well, firstly, wanting to help, but then also out of kind of anger at the industry and like wanting better. Like, I didn't want what happened to me to happen to anybody else.
Mm.
Like, I wanted to make sure that these people had a much better experience than I did, the first time around. And that's kind of the base of my coaching, is like, you should be able to have an incredible experience in your first year, like right when you move. You should be able to. Now there's so many more opportunities. Like, when I first moved abroad, like almost 11 years ago, teaching in China was like one of the only options. Now the world is your oyster, but a lot of people still, those fears are still there, right? Of like, what if I hate it? What if I give up my nice house or apartment, or I sell my home, sell my car, give up my job, and it all falls apart? Or, it's not what I thought it was going to be. So a lot of those emotions that were there back then, they exist for every country in every situation. But yeah, that's why I got started, was just because I knew if I can do it, anybody can do it. It's just having that sort of guidance and the right information. And then also, not falling into those like traps and pitfalls of certain like programs or companies that make it sound, oh, so it's so easy, we'll take care of everything for you, and then feeling disappointed.
Mm. Wow. Okay. Yeah. No. Thanks for sharing your story. Yeah, it sounds
Mhm.
like it was quite a tough first year to say the least for you. So yeah, helping people not go through those struggles is definitely a very admirable thing to do. And ultimately, people are wanting something. They want that sounds like they want, well, most people I assume want that kind of like dream life.
Mhm.
And they don't, and sometimes the reality, if they're not careful, could be something completely different, right? So that's kind
Yeah,
of
I mean, I was an idiot 22-year-old who didn't read my contracts fully and
uh,
just trusted a company to take everything for care of everything for me. And I'm like, read your contracts, people.
read your we're all young, we all get all at a kind of like young age we make those mistakes.
Right.
You're learning, you're helping others from, what you learned. So yeah, that's great. So
And a lot of the people, well, just quickly, a lot of the people
no.
that I work with are not 22 anymore, right? Like,
Mm,
it's easy to, when you're fresh out of college or university and, you've got nothing to lose and you got no money and you can crash on your parents' couch if you're in your old bedroom, childhood bedroom, if you mess up, like, that then it's easy to just be like, oh, whatever, I'll just go and see what happens. But a lot of the people that I work with now, they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s. You've got kids, you've got pets, you've got a solid career that you've worked your whole life,
mm,
for, or decades on. Maybe you own property and you've spent a lot of money like making your home the way that you want it to look. And so you've got things to like quote unquote lose now. And that's where a lot of the fear comes from. Like when you're doing this a little bit later in life, like if you're not going like right at 22 or 21 years old, like there's that fear there. And I think that's where that kind of self-confidence wavers a little bit of like, well, yeah, sure, I could do it, but I have my kids or my pets to look out for, or, but I don't want to throw my career away. I've worked so hard on this. And so that's where I come in, to
mm,
kind of help work through all of those things, because if it was just research or information, like you'd have gone already. Google exists,
mm,
right? But
sure.
it's
Love
it's
that.
those fears that are those deeper fears that often hold people back from going.
Yeah. 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 There's totally not a shortage of information out there, right? Of Google
There's
and
too
everything.
much now. Before there was not enough. When I first moved abroad, like there was nothing. I was reading books written in like 2007, but now there's too much. So it's almost the opposite. It's like the information overload.
Yeah. 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 Definitely. Then and can be a bit overwhelming as well. So yeah, like for the individual, I guess, who's like they know perhaps they want to move abroad, but they're not exactly sure where.
Mm-hmm.
How can they kind of get to more of a bit more clarity perhaps on where they want to go? I don't know if that's something you've worked with people before, that they're like, I do want to move abroad, but I'm really, really stuck. I do want to make a change, but I just don't know where.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think, some people that I work with, they have a very specific country in mind. They're like, I want to go here. It's France or bust. Like it has to be Germany or whatever it is. But many people that I work with, they're not sure. They're like, I have a general idea of what I know. I want to live abroad. I know I want to travel, but I'm not sure what country. And I don't know if I don't even know how to pick because there's so many countries that I want to see. And so what I do is I actually work with people to come up with their own unique plan, which has a few different things that you would need to decide. So like what kind of lifestyle that you want to live. Do you want to be a digital nomad and country hop every few months? Or do you want to move to a country specifically for a couple of years and then change? Or is there a country that you want to, immigrate to and live there forever?
Mm,
And then, what's the job piece? Are we going to be working remotely? Do we want a job on the ground? Because that might also impact what countries we can choose. Then picking a country or at least an area of the world to start with if you want to be a digital nomad. And then we put all the pieces together and put a timeline on it. So let's say you have no idea what country you want to move to. That's actually okay, because if you have strong opinions on the other pieces of the plan, that can actually help us narrow things down. Because when I first moved abroad, like I said, there were not a lot of options. So teaching in Asia was like a very strong choice if you were not working for an international company that was going to like transfer you. But now with all these digital nomad visas, the world is your oyster, because all these countries have realized like, wow, this is good for our economy. If people are making British pounds or USD and living here and spending the money, they're not taking jobs away from locals. So all of these different countries, especially in Europe, are opening up their doors to people like me to come and live there and, work online or run your business, right? So let's say you have no idea what country you want to move to, but you have just started your own business or you've just started freelancing, let's say, and you want to work remotely. You do not want a job on the ground. And let's say, you've always dreamed of living in Western Europe. Well, I can list out, I'm like, okay, cool. So we've got Spain, we've got Portugal, we've got Greece, we have Estonia, like the Cyprus, like there are all these different countries that you could choose. So let's narrow it down based on visas, and then let's pick one.
I like that. Kind of asking what would their lifestyle be? And then there's all these questions. And again, that's the beauty of having a coach or someone to support you with some of that facilitating and thinking it through. Like that, because it can be just like, I want to do this, I want to do that. And then I've been guilty of it in just other decisions as well. Like, it's too much. And then you forget about it. And then you just get on with things. And it's always nagging away at the back. Like, I want to make this change. So
it's so overwhelming as well, like to make all of these decisions if you don't know where to start. So that's why I always tell people, I'm like, until you have a plan, like, what kind of lifestyle you want, how you're going to make money, what country you're moving to, or at least what area of the world you're starting in, like, and you put a date on the calendar, until you have that, it's just a dream. It's not actually happening. So that's kind of the first step, is to figure out what you actually want, because once you have those 4 pieces, then there's something that we can work towards. But it's just so overwhelming with all of the different options and all the information. And then you're like, well, I don't know where to start because there's just so much. And I don't know, what country do I even want to move to? Or like, would I have to change my whole career? And then you just never get started. And then that's how that dream, like most of the people I work with, they've wanted to move abroad for 5 years, 10 years.
Wow.
Like, since I was a little girl, or like forever, people have told me. So it's, it just keeps getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. But until you have that, but when you actually have that solid concrete plan, then we can actually make it happen.
Getting it down on paper or computer or something like that, so it becomes more real, like that. And you mentioned the word overwhelm. I was going to ask you about that, but making a plan for me personally always helps combat some of that overwhelm. And who better than someone who's done it already, right?
But that overwhelm, it happens at every single stage too, because it's overwhelming to figure out the job and the country piece and make the decisions. But making the decision is just the first step. And I'm a huge nerd, so I have this like 5-step system, and it spells out the word dream, because I'm a nerdy like that. But the decide is the first step, right? But then we've got research, we've got execute, so actually like putting things into action. We've got arrival, and then mindset is the last piece, because that's all encompassing. It's important for every stage. But with when you get to the research stage, right? We've already said that there's too much information online, and some of it is outdated or wrong or was written in 2013. And then you're sifting through all this stuff, and you're reading through visa websites, and you're confused. And so there's overwhelm at pretty much every stage. And so what I actually tell people to do is to sort of break down your all the tasks that you have to do in order to move abroad. Like, write them all down. I have this thing I call the GTFO checklist, which is the list of everything you need to do before you GTFO. But you break things down, and then you put mini deadlines on things. And that way it feels way less overwhelming, because you can look at your list and be like, okay, yes, I do need to worry about how I'm going to sell and store and ship my stuff overseas. But that's an April problem. Like, that's not a right now problem. That's on my to-do list for later. So I can trust that my future self, like future Richelle, can deal with that in April. Right now, my goals for this month are this. And when you have those mini deadlines, it makes it so much easier to not push everything off. Because when you think of moving abroad as just one huge thing on your to-do list, it's really overwhelming and also really easy to just push the whole thing off, right? Because you're like, oh, I don't have time to work on moving abroad right now. I'll work on it next month. Whereas if it's, oh, I don't have time to work on my resume this week, I'll do it next week. You're only pushing things back by a week. You're not pushing things back by months or years.
I like that. Yeah. It's breaking it down step by step, because I could imagine, like, even just me, if I was thinking about it, like, moving abroad, I'd just be like, oh yeah, do that next year, do that next year, or
Yeah.
whatever. And like you
I'm
said,
busy working on my podcast right now. I'll do the, or I'm moving house, or my friend's getting married and I'm the best
yeah,
man. Like there's always a reason to push it back. But if it's, like firstly, I'm sure you know this, like with anything, investing in a coach, helpful to keep yourself
mm,
accountable, but it's the same thing with starting a business as well. Like, you and I both are in that realm. And it's
mm,
so easy to be like, oh, especially if you have, a 9 to 5, oh, I'll start my big business later, or I'll start my podcast later. The idea of running a podcast is so overwhelming. I don't even know where to start. There's so much to do. What platform do I use? What mic do I need to buy? And then you just push the whole thing off.
mm,
It's the same with every kind of big goal you want to achieve. So moving abroad is just one of them. And so if you think of something that if you really want to move abroad and you've done something already that's big, like starting a podcast or starting your own business or whatever it is, moving abroad is the same thing. It's
mm,
like, okay, there's a lot of stuff that needs to get done, but we need to break it down so it's not overwhelming. So if you're starting a podcast, it's like, okay, this week I'm going to figure out, what mic I need to buy and what recording platform I'm going to use. Check, right? So moving abroad's the same thing. It's just, it can feel scarier, feel different because, you've got that new cultural element and, you're kind of uprooting yourselves from your friends and family and physically moving somewhere else. But in principle, it's pretty much the same thing.
mm. Yeah, that's a good point. And just want to touch on what you said about friends and family. And I noticed
Mm-hmm.
you had an episode on this on your podcast, I believe, about the connection of away from your friends and family abroad. How did you find it at first, and how do kind of people manage those kind of relationships when they're abroad?
Yeah. So I think that's a great question. And that's something that a lot of people that I work with are very worried about.
Mm,
Not like leaving the friends and family is one piece. And then how do I make new friends abroad, especially if I'm
mm,
an introvert or if I'm not, I'm not super outgoing and super out there. Like, how do I actually make friends? And so, in terms of the leaving your friends and family and your worries around that, firstly, technology has really helped in that regard. So, I still text everybody. I use like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, FaceTime or Zoom. Like I can still talk to people whenever. And I've mentioned this before to some of my own coaching clients. If one of my friends is having a hard time, and like my first instinct isn't necessarily to get in the car and drive to her house. I'll call her or I'll text, right? And I can still, aside from time zones, like I can still do that abroad.
mm,
And if I were, I'm from Seattle, but I went to university in Washington, D.C. All my friends are everywhere anyway. So even if I moved back to the U.S., all my friends would be all over. But I can still have those close relationships, like through like calling and texting and things like that. But also when I do go back home, like and visit my family, I'll go for a month or two. And I'll stay in my parents' like house in the guest room. And I have so much more quality time with them and my family now that I live abroad than I would if I lived in the US. Like my brother lives a couple hours away in the same state. Like he lives in LA and my parents live by Palm Springs. My parents say, we see you more than we see him. We spend more time with you than if you than he does, and he lives in the same state. And also people have flown to visit me. Like my parents have come to Georgia twice, and China and Vietnam. I've had friends fly to visit me in China, Vietnam, Georgia just recently, and we've traveled around the country together. So you can still have those sort of meaningful trips and things like that as well. And in terms of the making friends abroad, I actually find it's easier to make friends overseas than back home because everybody's looking for friends. So there are so many events and things that people are invited to. Like I go to girls brunch once a month where it's like a brunch club and anybody's invited. There are so many different events at bars, or there's like a bagel place nearby that my friend owns, and he's always he's throwing like a Southern cooking thing this weekend, and like anybody's invited. So it's, you know, co-working spaces. So it's actually, in my opinion, much easier to make friends abroad than back home because everybody's looking for friends.
Oh, that's great to know. Great to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really useful because I know sometimes connection's an important thing to a lot of us, and
Mhm.
yeah, moving away from that when you move abroad can be a bit scary, I'd imagine. So yeah.
You'd be surprised. People will come visit. Like if
Mm.
you you throw it out there and you're like, yeah, come visit me. People will visit. Like, and they will take you up on it.
Yeah, amazing. On the flip side of that, or kind of maybe a little bit the opposite side, do you find like when people wanting to move abroad that sometimes maybe people you've worked, they've been impacted by maybe their friends or family and some of their opinions of moving abroad, and that's ever holding them back?
100%. Usually it's family, and definitely usually it's parents. Tends to be the hardest one. I have had some people who've had friends that are a little bit hesitant or upset that they're leaving, but usually it happens from parents who just don't get it. And I would say it actually happens the most. It's a really interesting phenomenon, but it happens the most among people whose parents themselves have immigrated. So, for example, like a lot of my clients, they're from the US. So it happens with like people whose parents who are not from the US and have moved to the US, and now they themselves want to move abroad and their parents don't get it. And
Ah,
you know, it tends to come from this. I think at least it's coming from this place of I gave up everything to bring you to the U.S. for a better life, and now you're throwing it in the trash.
oh wow.
Yeah. So those we do, like in my coaching, we can kind of navigate
Mm,
those difficult conversations. And a lot of times, when the people in your life, either friends, family, coworkers, whatever it is, a lot of times when people don't seem that supportive, it can actually be coming from a place of, I care about you and I'm worried about you. And so people in life often like to project their their own sort of fears or limiting beliefs onto other people. So if you've never wanted to move abroad in your whole life and you are scared of the idea of doing that, if you like safety and security and stability of, you know, having your like salary and 9 to 5 job and like being in your home country and staying in your hometown or whatever it is, and somebody wants to move abroad, like that's probably not the person that you want to be confiding in if you've got your own fears about moving abroad,
mm,
because you're not going to get good advice from them. But this happens a lot with friends and family who they just want what's best for you. So it can feel like they're not supportive when in reality, I would say 80 to 90% of the time that people are kind of feeling like those in their life aren't as supportive as they'd like them to be. It's just coming from a place of that person is scared of the idea of moving abroad and concerned about you because they care about you. So you'll hear these what if questions like, what if you don't like it? What if you run out of money? What if you ruin your career? Like, what if you get scammed? What if it's dangerous? What if you end up in the hospital of no one to help you? It's what if, like worst case scenario, like insert here, right? And so a lot of times the strategy that I give people to use with the people in your life is exactly the same strategy that you should use for your own self if you have those what ifs,
mm,
which is, you know, it's kind of a 3-step process where I think about, okay, firstly, like what is the likelihood of this actually happening? But how do we make sure that this doesn't happen? Then worst case scenario, if it does happen, what would we do? And so
mm,
I'll workshop this with people. I'd be okay, how do we make sure that you don't run out of money abroad? And then we'll kind of workshop through that together. And then I'll say, okay, worst case scenario, you have zero money in your bank account and you're abroad. What would you do?
mm,
And then they'll say, okay, well, you know, like absolute worst case scenario, I'm freelancing and I have no money coming in and my bank account's at zero. I guess I have a credit card. And so I know my parents would let me stay with them for a little bit. So I could book a flight on the credit card and then I could, you know, fly back home and we figure, you know, we kind of workshop out worst case scenario, what would actually happen. And then once we've kind of done that, that's the same exact thing that you can do with your friends and family. Like, and it was the same thing I did when people questioned me about leaving my stable job in China, right when people finally started to respect my decisions about living in China, because I was actually making good money. I'm like, I'm going to quit and start my own business. But my parents said to me, oh, what if it doesn't work out? I'm like, well, if it doesn't work out, I've got, 20 grand in savings to get this business started. And, I'm moving to a country where rent is my now husband and I were splitting a place in Vietnam that was like $500 a month and for rent. And so,
Wow.
and I said, if it doesn't work out, if I can't launch my business, then I'll just go back to East Asia and get a job as a college counselor again. I'm sure my old company would take me back. And if there's no room, I'll just get another job in China or South Korea or Singapore. Like there's plenty of jobs available. So if I run out of money, I'll just like go get a job in Asia again.
Oh, okay.
And
Like
they're like, oh, okay. If you've thought about it already and you say it with confidence, people will take you seriously.
like it. And yeah, that kind of thing, like that kind of plan B, but not aiming for the plan B, but you got kind of
No.
that backup. But it's that, yeah, it's almost that giving you that little bit of confidence as well that you've got it. I think it's I think that's useful for, again, multiple areas of your life as well. Like, oh, what if this happens? But again, yeah, we're talking about, yeah, moving abroad.
But it's the same skills for
mm,
anything,
mm,
Yeah. What if I quit my job and start my own business and it doesn't work out?
exactly.
Well, this is my plan B. This is my backup. And then you know, it'll appease you. Like when I know you and I were in the same like business coaching program. And it was like, for me, quite pricey to invest in that program. I was very
Mm,
scared because I was freelancing and trying to start my coaching and it wasn't taking off. And I was like, the most I'd ever made in a launch was like $2,000. And I couldn't even afford, I had to take out a loan to pay for this program. I couldn't even put the monthly payment on a payment plan. I was like that strapped for money. And my husband and I had decided, because I was so stressed out and it was impacting my health. And I wanted to run my own coaching business and help people do this so bad. And it was my dream, but it just wasn't happening. And I had tried everything and I invested all this money in coaching and I tried and tried and tried. And I was exhausted and it was impacting my health. And so the idea was I had 6 months to make it work. And if I couldn't make it work in 6 months, then I'd have to start looking at jobs in East Asia, and we'd go back to East Asia and I'd have a 9 to 5 again. And so I remember like talking on a mindset call about my fear that I'm going to like run this boot camp and it's not going to work out. So then that mindset coach was like, okay, well, what are you going to do then? So like worst case scenario, it doesn't work out. What would you do? And I'm like, well, would you just quit immediately? And I'm like, no. I get 6 months. I could try again. I could do another boot camp. Like I get 6 months to make this work. I'm just going to quit immediately. And then she's like, okay, it doesn't work in 6 months. Then what do you do? And I'm like, well, I would get a job in East Asia. And she's like, well, worst case. So if you don't do this right now, then you would just get that job in East Asia anyway. So you might as well go for it then, right? Like worst case scenario, you end up doing the thing that you'd have to do if you didn't try. So might as well just go all in. She's like, this is really your last chance. Might as well just go all in on it then, because otherwise you're gonna have to get the job in East Asia anyway. And it just I'm like made my mind explode.
Light bulb.
But
I think I remember that conversation. Yeah. Yeah. I remember that.
She made me cry in front of everyone. It's fine.
Oh, bless. No, it's some of those work, those conversations that kind of like change your way of thinking. So,
yeah, you're all swept up in your own fears where I'm like,
yeah.
I invested like thousands of dollars in this program. And what if I can't make it back? I'm like, oh, well, she said, well, if you got that job in East Asia, how long would it take to pay back the money you've invested in this program? And I'm like, I don't know, like 2 months, with the extra money for my salary. And she's like, then what are you so worried about then?
Oh, yeah. It's just... sometimes it puts us into that kind of like, that panic mode, because the brain's not necessarily all like there. But when you start putting it in perspective, someone coming from the outside, it can really help. And yeah, I like what you're doing, like workshopping the worst case scenario, because if people are thinking about it then, and then actually something does happen, life's unpredictable, right? You've actually got that kind of, rather than being into that state and then being reacting, and actually there, you've actually got idea, that plan B in your head already. So I like that, what you're doing with the
It takes you out of
workshopping.
the emotions of it
Mm,
and makes you look at it logically. And then we kind of do a reframe at the end where like
mm,
when your mind starts panicking of, like what if I lose my job when I'm abroad and this horrible thing happens? It's like, okay, like I understand that you're trying to keep me safe, brain, but worst case scenario, if I lost my job abroad, I could just XYZ. And then you just tell yourself that every time that fear comes up. And
mm.
then it stops controlling you in the way that it was before.
I like that. I think that's, again, very relatable to multiple situations, but yeah, I think that's super good. So, Richelle, as we kind of wrap things up today, I wanted to ask you, if you could give the listener your number one confidence tip, what would it be? And also, could you share with us where the listener can find you and if you've got anything coming up at all?
Ooh, my number one confidence tip. I wish I had prepared. I guess let's see. I guess my number one confidence tip would be that, it's hard to have confidence in something that you haven't seen yet,
Mm,
right? Like until you've actually shown yourself that you can do it, it's hard to have that confidence going in. And so just taking things kind of one step at a time and like inching towards that dream, slowly you'll look around and you'll say, "Oh my gosh, I am doing it." And then once you see, and I literally am thinking back to a conversation that I had on a coaching call last night where someone is moving like in 2 weeks, right? And she's like, Can I actually do this?" I'm like, "You are doing this." Like, what do you mean, can I actually do this? You've got your flight booked, like you're already talking to people about apartments, you've already gotten your visa. You are doing this. Right. So like taking those little steps forward before you realize it, you are doing it. Right. So it sort of takes away that fear a little bit. But I always think, and I always say, if something scares you in a good way, that's how you know you need to do it.
yeah, love that.
Yeah. But
Great.
to answer the other part of your question, you asked where people can find me, right?
Yeah, yeah. Where can the
Awesome.
listener find out more about you? And is there anything you want to share with us?
Awesome. Yeah. So you can find me at Move Abroad Coach in all the places. So we have the Move Abroad Coach podcast. If you are a lover of podcasts, which you probably are if you're listening to this, but also on Facebook and Instagram. You can always reach out to me via Instagram DM if you want to get in touch. And then we do have something really exciting coming up.
Mm,
So if you are wanting to create your own personalized plan for moving abroad, we do have a live Move Abroad Escape Plan boot camp coming up. We're starting on February 17th, and we officially open up for, if you want to grab a ticket, we officially open up on the 5th. But if you want to pop in, if you're listening to this live and you want to pop in on the wait list early, we do have a special gift for everybody on the wait list. But the boot camp itself, it's only $37, and it's a 4-day boot camp where we're going to create your plan together. So day one, we'll figure out what kind of lifestyle you want. Day 2 is all about making money. Day 3, country. Day 4, we're putting all the pieces together. So if you actually if you're listening to this and you really want to move abroad, this is a really good first step to actually figure out, okay, what's my plan so I can go and implement it.
wow, $37 for creating your dream life. Bargain. Love it,
Yeah.
Richelle.
Or at least the first step.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just escapeplanbootcamp.com, but I can send you the link if you'd like to put it in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. We'll definitely be linking all that up. So, Richelle, once again, a massive thank you for everything you've shared today and coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So that concludes our episode for today. And remember, you are in control of your own self-esteem and confidence.